It will be posted on some form of county website. It'll be shared with those who want to have it also. So we have Supervisor Bushnell with us tonight, and Justin Robbins with the RID. We have Michael Richardson with Planning and Building Department, and Bob Bronco with the Public Works Department. My name's John Ford. I'm with Planning and Building, and I saw Cody Rogatz, the airport director, come online also. Supervisor Bushnell, is there anything you'd like to say as we start tonight?
No, hi everybody, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to explain and answer some questions. I do want to say that we are on a 2-hour time frame. John, is that correct? Director Ford? And we want to try to get to your questions, and we're going to do this in a very respectful way. So that's how we're going to start. Thank you.
Thanks, Supervisor. Dustin, are you here? Is there anything you'd like to say?
Thanks, John. I just want to say, well, first of all, I want to welcome everyone from the Shelter Cove community that's on this meeting this evening. And I want to thank Director Ford, Supervisor Bushnell, Cody with Department of Aviation, Michael Richardson, and Bob Bronco for joining in. So I would just add that it's probably best to keep your video off so it minimizes streaming interruptions. And it looks like everybody's pretty much figured out how to mute themselves and unmute themselves. So yes, just welcome everybody, and so pleased that so many folks in the community are joining us this evening. Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thanks, Justin. So Michael, Cody, Bob, I'm not sure do we have a program for this, or we're just going to run through an introduction of the ALUCP?
I did not prepare a specific agenda for this, but perhaps the best way that we might want to lead off the project is to describe the process that might happen if someone were to walk into the public counter at Planning and Building and want to get a permit to do something on their property down in Shelter Cove near the airport. What steps would happen along the way with that? And I think that might be a good starting point. What do you think, John?
Can I interrupt really quick?
Sure.
Can we clarify some of the changes that have happened from the 93 to current? There is some confusion on that. So if we could somehow briefly just go over the zoning and just a small description so that people that are on here that don't understand that would have a clear understanding.
Okay.
All right.
So Michael or Cody or Bob, do you have either the 93 or the 2021 map up right now? I'm looking to pull it up as quickly as I can.
I'm working to get mine up too. Bear with me. I got the 93 opening. And I've got the 2021 open.
Okay. Why don't you walk us through the changes?
All right, let me pull up the maps for that airport. So bear with me, and I'll share my screen.
Do you have that, Bob?
Yeah, just hang on one second here. I'm having a slight technical difficulty. I need to rotate my monitor so it shows up good on Zoom. Otherwise, it's going to show up like a little postage stamp and no one's going to be able to see anything. I meant to do that before the meeting started, but didn't happen. So display settings. All right, now we'll share the screen. All right, everyone should see my screen now. And I'm going to try not to give everyone vertigo when I search down to find Shelter Cove Airport here.
It's on page 431.
Oh, PDF page 431.
Yep.
All right. All right, that's the noise map. And the noise map isn't really a land use tool. This is a map.
Sorry.
help.
Next page, Bob. Sorry.
Yeah. Which is fine though, but I do want to explain the noise map since we do have it up. But the noise map is to help identify how aircraft noise will impact the surrounding community. The county doesn't have any noise ordinances at this time. This just identifies how much noise one might expect to hear in these areas surrounding the airport. This diagram is the safety zone map. And this is the map that we're going to want to go ahead and compare to the 93 map to share with what's different. Both maps are somewhat similar in that they identify different safety zones. The current plan refers to them as safety zones. The prior plan refers to them as airport compatibility zones. So let's go ahead and we'll pull it up in the 93 plan here. So this graphic is the 93 plan. And in here you could see we had 1, 2, 3, 4 different zones. The A zone is considered the active runway area, and that is the most critical zones next to an airport. The FAA recommends that all properties within the A zone be owned by the government as an ideal situation. That's not necessarily always the case with the airports, but that's a desired long-term goal of the FAA, is that in order to properly protect the A zone, a government at some point should eventually acquire ownership of it. The next two zones are the B1 zones, and those are your typical approach zones leading into the runways. Then the C zone is the next critical zone, indicating that there's a high likelihood of overflight. There typically isn't much of a land use restriction in the old C zone. Waiting for the ambulance to pass. So in the C zone, you're not seeing too much land use restrictions like you do in the B zones or the A zones. The A zone is the most critical, which prohibits just about all development of all types. The B zone typically is introducing density restrictions on it. The C zone allows pretty much all land uses, but does require dedication of overflight and navigation easements. The D zone indicates that those land uses are subject to overflight of aircraft and that a form of deed notice should be recorded on the property to advise future owners that, yeah, you might hear airplanes flying overhead. Those were the zones that were developed in the 93 plan, and that shows the overall influence area.
Honey, how do I do screenshot?
How do what?
How do I do screenshot?
Control shift.
Can you mute yourself, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and tab over to the other screen, which is the current 2021 ALUCP. So this is the safety zones that are set up for the airport, and they are numbered 1 through 4, and it's very similar to what was done with the 93 plan, and that the order of importance is the lower the number, the more important the zone is, and the more restrictive land use controls are placed on those particular zones. In addition to the safety zone data, they actually have a review zone, which I think is going to be the next slide. Now that's the airspace protection.
I'll look up where that goes.
But that's the airspace. And that's your legs of your
And this is the
airspace.
airspace notification map where overflight notification is required. There should be one more exhibit. There should be another exhibit, which I'm not finding right now, that would show 2 different review zones, review zone 1 and 2, I believe. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute and flip over to so I can find that other page without giving everyone vertigo as I quickly scroll through everything.
Hey, Bob, I don't want to interrupt you, but while you're looking, I would like you to go back to that map that shows all the different safety zones and describe the level of restriction that's involved in those, because they are a little bit more precise, and in some cases, it's a little bit less restrictive than the 93 plan. And so it'd be helpful to know if there's areas that are more restrictive and areas that are less restrictive.
Yes. So let me jot down a page number here for us to refer back to. So I found another table that we'll want to bring up to discuss those safety zones to give an idea of that. That's around page 79.
Bob, I think the table you're looking for is table 3-2.
And then figure 1-9 was the other figure I wanted to go ahead and display here. So that's on page 33. All right. And thank everyone for your patience as we navigate this without any sort of formal agenda and are quickly trying to find all the documents to share. So this page is the airport influence area, and there's two areas around the airport, review area 1 and review area 2. This describes how in-depth projects are looked at within these two different review areas. And that's described elsewhere in the ALUCP. All right, I'm going to switch back to the page that John had us at. I think that was 433. $432. I'm writing page numbers down so we could switch back and forth as needed. This was safety zone map. So with this, we're going to need to take a mental photograph of generally what this looks like. And we could see that we do have areas around the airport that are in safety zone 1, being the airport. And then within the turning areas approaching the runway, we have safety zone 3. We do have a little bit of safety zone 2 at the ends of the runway, and then a safety zone 4. So we've got all 4 zones at this particular airport. So the next question is, great, we got these zones. What does it mean about land uses around the airport? So let's go ahead and switch to the safety zones. That's on page 79. So within the ALUCP, this is the current one, the 2021 ALUCP. Across the top of the screen, it's listing the safety zone numbers 1 through 6. And it's talking about different land use types. The first row talks about maximum residential density that's allowed in these different zones. And you can see starting in zone 1, which is the active runway, you're not supposed to have any houses in the active runway area. And as you start getting farther out, you're allowed to have density. So in zone 2, the density is supposed to be 0.1 residential unit per acre. And then in zone 3, 0.5 residential units per acre. This doesn't really come into play unless you're looking at subdividing the property. If you already have a legal lot, then even if it is under 10 acres here in zone 2, you'd still be able to procure a building permit to put a house on your property. This zoning only comes into play when you're looking at subdividing your property in the future. The next row down, maximum non-residential intensity, deals with non-residential uses and the number of people per acre that should be allowed. And this is a perfect example where you can really see it starts at 0 for the active runway area, and the numbers keep increasing as you get into the zones that are farther and farther away from the airport, or from the airport's runway. Then down below, and this is going to continue on for several pages, there's different categories of land uses. It starts with agriculture, then it jumps down to commercial. And on subsequent pages, we've got more commercial, then we got manufacturing. We've got recreational parks and open space. And what you're seeing within this is it's color coded. You have red showing up with an I in there to indicate that it's an incompatible use. You're seeing yellow come into play that says CC, and that means it's conditionally compatible when certain things are done. And those certain things are listed in the last column, which is criteria for conditional compatibility. And that lists what would need to be done in order for it to be conditionally compatible to the airport. And then C is it's a compatible use. So that's how the safety zones tie into the safety compatibility criteria in table 3.2 that then drives what someone could perhaps do on their property. So at this time, I think it could be helpful to go through the process when someone walks through the front door with a project and they want to go ahead and get a permit. So what happens is when staff meets with the counter staff, staff's able to go ahead and determine if their project is near the airport or not. If it's nowhere near an airport, then there is no airport review for the project. If the project is within the airport review area for one of the county maintained airports or the RID airport, that's when an additional review is looked at for a particular project. That's when we go ahead, look at what the review area is. We look at what the safety compatibility criteria is for the project, and then begin looking at what someone wants to go ahead and do on that particular piece of property. So let's start with something that, as an example, let's say there's a project to do retail sales.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
So I'm going to interrupt you for a minute because in the chat room, there's a lot of questions and what a lot of people are really questioning and concerned about is, what happens on an existing vacant residential lot and they want to build a house.
You come in, you apply for a permit, and you get your permit. Because you're in Shelter Cove, you also get the benefit of needing a coastal development permit.
Correct. But the plan allows a house to be built on all existing lots with the exception of in safety zone 1.
Correct.
Correct?
Yes.
So what about any height restrictions?
All right, separate from the ALUCP, county code has height restrictions that have been coded in the book since the 1950s. And I believe it was in 2020, the county adopted revisions to the airspace code to conform to federal regulations, FARs 77, concerning the airspace around the airports. So that was a code change we did, I believe, in 2020 to make county code consistent with FAR 77.
So it's really important to understand here, and maybe we could switch back to full view, but for people to understand that there's a difference between the ALUCP and those federal regulations that get implemented separately, and those are where the height restrictions are.
Correct. And that still applies to if the 93 plan were in effect, the same height restrictions apply to that plan as they would to the 2021 plan. It's a completely independent code that's hard coded into our county code.
Yeah, so I just want everybody to understand that height restrictions are not a change of the ALUCP. That is something that exists separately. And that I know people were asking about where they can find the reference to allowing a single family residence to be built. That's on page 2-15. It's under GP-23, development by right. It says, other than in safety zone 1, which is the runway protection zone, construction of a single family home, including a second unit, as defined by state law on a legal lot of record as of the date of adoption of this ALUCP, if such use, i.e. residential, is permitted by local land use regulations. So Bob's entirely right. It may require approval of a coastal development permit, But basically the ALUCP does not restrict the ability to place a primary residence and a second unit on an existing residential lot of record. Okay, so just wanted to get that one out there really, really clear so that a lot of those questions could be answered. Sorry, Bob, to interrupt you, but I just thought that's probably where a lot of folks are struggling.
No, it's a good point, but I do want to kind of continue through the process of what happens when someone walks through the door. Because
Please do.
this gets to the meat of what happens to someone's property when you are in these airport zones. And it's important for everyone to understand what steps go along the way and how things are processed. So getting back to our example, if we are looking at doing a retail project in zone 6, that showed up in that table 3-2 as being a compatible use. That means that for that land use, it's administratively approved. There's no further analysis by staff is needed on this. You do not need to take a project before the Airport Land Use Commission for any sort of consideration. Essentially, the process for ALUC review essentially ends at that point because it's a compatible use. That's the best case scenario for a project. You have a land use that's in the green C compatibility side. You got the green light to go ahead and move something forward. When you have a project that is conditionally compatible, in most cases, you're still going to go ahead and get the green light to go ahead and move your project forward. You just need to go ahead and adhere to the special requirements that are in that last column of the safety compatibility criteria on that sheet. Now, if you're proposing a land use that is completely incompatible, there is still a likelihood that such a project could be permitted. And that would require a review by the ALUC, which is the Airport Land Use Commission, which in this case, in the county of Humboldt, also happens to be the Board of Supervisors, but wearing an ALUC hat. The ALUC would then review the project to determine if it's compatible or not compatible. Because it's listed as an incompatible use, their finding would be that it's an incompatible use. The next step in the process is an applicant could then go ahead and petition the local agency, being the Board of Supervisors, to consider an overrule of the actions by the ALUC, and then perhaps allow that project to go ahead and be approved. If it is in the incompatible zone, there would need to be strong reasons why such a project would need to go ahead and be approved. The purpose of these safety zones is to go ahead and protect the land uses on the ground from the impacts of the airport around it. And it's important that the county adhere to these policies to help protect the residents around the airport and to help protect the airport. There's grant assurances, and I know this is something that Cody could speak to, that go along with grant funding for airport projects. So in this case, Resort Improvement District, when they're off applying for grants to improve the airport, one of the things that they do with the grant application is they sign grant assurances that they're going to go ahead and do their darndest to go ahead and protect the airport from things that could negatively affect the airport. So that is a critical thing that comes along with getting funding from the FAA to go ahead and make improvements to the airport. That's the general overview of how projects get approved. I do want to go ahead and chime in with another section, which is leading into the height restrictions that John had mentioned. on the county's GIS, we do have a layer on there for the areas that potentially, or I should say that they are the FAR 77 airspace limits that are plotted on the GIS. And that identifies all the properties that are potentially subject to height restrictions based upon what the ground elevation might be of that property. Properties within those zones would then need to go ahead and demonstrate that they're not creating a height restriction area. In many cases, this is something that staff administratively does because it's quite obvious based upon the geographic location of a piece of property that there is no height impact. In other cases, there could be issues with heights. A perfect example from a few years back would be Jippo Ale when they built their facility on the north side of the airport. Because of the proximity of that project, the applicant needed to go ahead and demonstrate that the project would not be penetrating those protected airspaces. And the applicant ended up to make some minor changes to the roof line to avoid penetrating those protected airspaces that are set forth in FAR 77. So that's a perfect case where even though there was a penetration into FAR 77 through a minor architectural change, the project was able to be modified to be able to be approved and permitted in that particular location. So there's a perfect case of everything working the way it's supposed to work, in the airport being protected, the business being protected, and the business allowing to go ahead and develop. That's my presentation.
Thanks, Bob. That was very, very helpful. I think one of the things that may be helpful to do, there seem to be some questions about multifamily and commercial, and I know that you were starting there. And I was trying to pull, my GIS is not pulling up right now, but I just maybe want to take a real-time look at some commercial properties and maybe multifamily properties and go through that process of review that you were talking about earlier.
All right. My GIS just popped up. I guess the bandwidth's better at the other end of the building.
Evidently it is. So I think one of the things that would probably be helpful too, before we get too far along, is to talk about where not only the regulations that are contained within the 2021 ALUCP that was adopted came from, and is this something that goes well beyond what the state and federal government is looking for us to do, and then also talk about where the FAR numbers and height restrictions are coming from and how those and why those exist separately. And just so people understand, the point that I want to be able to demonstrate is that the county hasn't gone off and decided to arbitrarily be overly restrictive. What we tried to do was to implement something that complies with the regulations that are appropriate for airport use and for land use development around airports. You gave me such a beautiful explanation of it yesterday. I guess I was trying to get you to replay that.
Well, that was yesterday and today's today. My GIS doesn't seem to be working too well. I have the aerial up, but it's not showing me the normal menus on the screen for some reason.
Yeah, no, that's been my struggle. And frankly, I've been sitting here the whole time trying to pull it up, and I just got it to pull up. Let me see if I can do it.
There's some addresses in the chat too, if you need some that I can give you on Lower Pacific Drive.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So everybody should at this point see, oops, did I just kill it?
You got
You're on
email up.
your emails are up.
Oh, gosh. There it is. So,
Okay.
so we've got do you see the GIS now?
Yes.
Okay, so, and I think I can also throw on the overlay of the, so we may need to vacillate a little bit back and forth between these, but as we see this area right in here would be compatibility zone 1. So that would be the area that is most compromised, right?
Yes.
And if we were to do the same thing with the 93 plan, we would see that the 93 plan showed the runway here. And this is identified as B1. And what would B1 have allowed, Bob?
B1 does allow residential uses at a decreased density. I don't have my 93 plan. Actually, I have it up digitally, so I can scroll over here. Hang on. Let's get to table 2A.
Hello, Director Ford, Director Bob Bronkel, and Supervisor Bushnell. Can I chime in for a couple seconds? I'll be respectful and quick.
We will open this up for questions in a few moments. I'm sorry we're a little rough right now, but just trying to step into this. I do want to open it up to questions, but I want to do it in an orderly manner, if that's acceptable to you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
So under the B1 zoning in the 93 plan, normally acceptable uses, any use that's allowed in zone A, agriculture uses except those that attract flocks of birds, warehouse, truck terminals, single-story offices. Those are the uses that are typically allowed in the B1 zone. Sorts of things that would not be involved in the B1 zone are residential subdivisions, intensive retail uses, intensive manufacturing or food processing uses, multi-story offices, hotels and motels. And that comes right out of table 2A in the 93 ALUCP.
Okay. So I just want to go back to this then, and in 2, which really surrounds most of the commercial area here. What kinds of uses would be allowed there? Maybe I should stop that and let you walk through the table again so people could see that.
I think I'm going to share my screen for a minute.
Okay,
That
go
might
ahead.
be helpful.
Yep.
I can't share until you stop sharing.
Yeah, I have done something here that is not working for me.
I think the stop share might be at the top of your screen.
It's not. It's now down in a little box that I can't seem to get to click.
Yikes. All right, well, John's trying to work this out. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to talk about Appendix C, Charlie, Appendix Charlie in the 93 ALUCP. And this is talking about the types of uses that would be allowed in the B1 zone. So this gets down into the nitty gritty of it. Large shopping malls, which is 500,000 square feet, incompatible. Oh, there we go.
My apologies.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and share this. This way you guys can see it. Is this big enough for people to see on their screens, or is it too small?
That looks good, Bob.
You could actually read it?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm not going to read every single line since everyone can read it. What's important to note is you can see the compatibility on this screen on the left side. It's listing the types of land uses. Then over on the right side, it's got the different compatibility zones, the A, the B, the C, the D. And underneath of it, they're using different codes. When you see the minus, that means it's not an allowed use. When you see the O listed there, that means that it could be allowed. And then when you see the plus, it's allowed. So as you can see in the A zone, when I move my cursor over this, are you seeing my cursor move? Excellent.
Yes.
So in the A zone, nothing's allowed. However, in the B1 zone, you can see that there's quite a bit of uses that are allowed. The one-story retail, the restaurants and drinking establishments, your auto and marine services, building materials, hardware, heavy equipment type, office buildings, banks, repair shops, gas stations, government buildings, one-story motels, memorial parks and cemeteries, and truck terminals. Those are the sorts of commercial uses that are currently allowed, or that were allowed in the B1 zone under the 93 plan. Are there other uses that we should look at from the 93 plan since I have this up?
Can you go to residential real quick? Multifamily?
All right. So multifamily residential would not be allowed in the B zone. It's potentially allowed in the C zone and always allowed in the D zone.
Thanks, Bob.
Bob, what page is this? Is from 93 or current? The current.
This is from the 93 plan.
Okay.
And what I'm looking at is Appendix C.
Okay. What page are you on?
It's on PDF page 104.
Okay, thank you.
It may be slightly different than the PDF that's posted on the internet for the 93 plan.
Okay.
Both the 93 plan and the 2021 plan are on the county website. So both documents are available to be downloaded and looked at. If anyone has difficulty trying to locate them and they need to get them, they can email me or call me and I'll send you links to where you can find it at. That way you're not searching in vain for these documents.
Is there a possibility to post those documents, the link in the chat? Is that easily done or not?
I think I can.
Okay, if you can't, that's fine.
Yeah,
What I would like,
Michael and I
to do-
posted the 2021.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I'm sorry. The 2021 is there.
So what I'd like to do is at some point when someone else is speaking, so we don't have awkward silence while I'm cutting and pasting into the chat box, I'll take a little break and do it at that point.
Okay.
Are we at a good point where you might want to talk, John, and I could do a little cut and paste action?
Yeah, there was a request to go back to the GIS to look at the northern part of the property. And so if you want to give me the ability to screen share again, I will see if I can do it without creating too much of a headache. So people were asking for the northern portion of the airport. And so is everybody seeing the GIS now?
Yes.
Nice. So we'll zoom in here quite a bit. So again, this is the safety zone 1. This is 2. So this area is single family residential. You have some general commercial here. The area that is identified as NR is natural resource. And so that would basically be essentially open space. This is all area that is owned, I believe, by the RID. You've got some existing residential lots here and around here.
John, can I ask you a question with existing?
Yes.
So I've been asked several times if a house is demolished or destroyed, earthquake, fire, whatever, in an existing area, would they be allowed to rebuild same structure, same type, same footprint if it's in that more restrictive area?
So the regulations allow construction of a single family house within the AL. Again, this is a really important thing. We need to separate out the height restrictions from the ALUCP, either 93 or 2021. The height restrictions are not part of either plan. So the 2021 ALUCP would allow rebuilding of the house just like it is. So then I'm going to ask Bob, because I am not clear on this, would height restrictions come into play for reconstruction of an existing structure in the exact same footprint, exact same configuration?
I believe they would. And there is a procedure in place to go ahead and address the height restrictions. And this was placed into the update of County Code 333. And what this does allow is for an applicant to go ahead and submit their project information online to the FAA through something called a Form 7460-1. And I think we've got links to that on the website somewhere. And when the FAA comes back with a finding of no hazard to flight, then we're able to go ahead and proceed with permitting the project at that point. So anytime that someone's got a project that is potentially a hazard to flight, that's the first step in the process. If the FAA blesses that, then we're golden. And then if not, I do believe, before I speak on that, I think there might be another recourse that was added into the county code that gets a hearing before the Board of Supervisors for consideration. But the first step was seeking concurrence through the FAA and if the FAA says it's fine, then we administratively move it forward.
Thanks, Bob. So one of the other questions I know was out there going into this meeting is whether or not the RID could opt out of the ALUCP. Because there are provisions in there that allow a local agency to not follow the ALUC. And the struggle there is that the ALUC or the RID, I'm sorry, and forgive me for all the acronyms, but the RID is a local agency But in order to be a local agency that can opt out, it has to be a local agency with land use control. And the RID does not have land use control. The land use control is through the county. So the ALUC ALUCP, excuse me, is a document that is in place that the RID cannot choose to opt out of. I think at this point, Michael or Cody, is there anything that you guys would add? And then I'm going to open it to questions.
Well, before we do that, I do want to share County Code 333 to deal with the height restrictions. There's an important section in here that I think will answer a lot of questions. So I'm going to
Okay.
share my screen yet again. And this is County Code 333-8. And this is the code section that deals with height restrictions around the airports. So in the event that someone had a project that was penetrating the airspace, there is a procedure in place where you can appeal to the Board of Supervisors for a variance. And that is in this code section that's up on the screen. And it says that the variance may be granted by the Board of Supervisors following the receipt of report of the findings made by the Department of Aviation. Such variance shall be allowed where a literal application or enforcement of the regulations would result in practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship, and the relief granted would not be contrary to the public interest, but would do substantial justice and would be in accordance with the spirit of this chapter, provided, however, that any variance may be subject to such reasonable conditions and restrictions that the Board of Supervisors may deem necessary. So ultimately, the board can do these variances. The one thing that we did put into here is a streamlining effort, which is paragraph B. And this is very important because this says that when portions of a structure or tree penetrate the airport protected airspace and the FAA has determined that such penetration is not a hazard to flight, a variance may be administratively approved by the director of the Department of Aviation. So we've eliminated the need for any sort of appeal and a hearing before the board if the FAA determines that there's not a hazard to flight. So this is permit streamlining in its finest that we were able to come up with when the code was adopted along the way. And it's very important that everyone recognize that there is relief granted through a variance and perhaps even administrative relief if the FAA is on board with it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. That was really, really helpful. So, Michael, Cody, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd just like to touch on that code 333 and part 77. Bob did a great job explaining that and highlighting that variance. He also referenced Form 7460 earlier. If anybody on here is looking at getting a permit and you go to fill that 7460 form out, that's something that I've been working with for many, many years. So if you need assistance, just contact my office and I can help walk you through that process. Also, the 7460 process, I want to highlight, can take up to 45 days to receive feedback from the FAA. And that's because the FAA, upon submittal, runs those 7460 documents through multiple lines of business. That's not anything that my office or Bob or John's office can speed up or control. It's that administrative effort is on the FAA side. But that variance, as long as you can receive that finding of no hazard to air navigation, you can proceed forward with your project. And the Shelter Cove Airport, while I don't have all of the documents for that particular airport, I think Justin might have those. At a maximum, you're looking at a 20-to-1 surface. Where at the ACV airport in McKinleyville, we have certain areas where you have 50-to-1 rise over run restrictions because of our approaches. The Shelter Cove Airport doesn't have the precision approaches that we have available here at the ACV airport. So therefore, the height restrictions are less restrictive around Shelter Cove than they would be around a more complex facility.
Thanks, Cody. Michael.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add, except we did process blanket variants with a subdivision, and that may be something that the community wants to pursue.
Yeah, thanks. And just as Bob and Cody and Michael are talking, just want to reiterate, those requirements are not part of the ALUCP. So that's part of the municipal code. So we're going to open up for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, I'd ask you to raise your hand and or somehow flag me and I'll call on you. But I know Justin's been fielding a lot of questions and he may have a sense of some things that should be addressed first. And so Justin, I'm going to go to you first and give you a first crack at asking anything that you want to address.
Thank you, John. I think maybe one of the things that we should address is the question about multifamily parcels and within zones 2 through 5, if the existing multifamily parcels can be considered infill within the conditionally compatible list of uses for multifamily. The plan says that multifamily structures can be permitted to be constructed if those structures are considered to be infill. And so, John, if you could, and you and I have already spoke about that in the past, but if you could speak to the interpretation of infill and how that would apply to existing multifamily parcels within the development. Thank you.
And thanks, Justin. So infill is normally something where you're developing on a lot that has development all the way around it. And so in those cases that would qualify as infill, and then we would treat it as a parcel that would fall under that particular provision. A parcel that, and I apologize, I haven't looked at the zoning to see if there are multifamily zone parcels that are either in safety zone 2 or 3, which may be a little bit more restrictive. But for the most part, the existing lots, I think definitely would get at least 2 units for multifamily. If they're infill, if they're surrounded by other development, they would be able to be developed to the extent of their zoning capacity. If they're outstanding on their own and in a restricted zone, then we would probably look at it we would need to address it a little differently, not as infill. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it did. How you phrase that, develop to the extent of its development potential, and something that is speaking for the Resort Improvement District here. Excuse me, speaking as the general manager for the Resort Improvement District, not for the board of directors necessarily, but I would hope that the county would interpret that favorably for multifamily parcels. There are multifamily units currently they're currently constructed off of Lower Pacific Drive and streets that attach to Lower Pacific, and basically how I look at it and look at the map, that it would be considered infill. We already have some multifamily parcels that are developed with multifamily structures, and there are multifamily designated parcels that are within each of the zones 2, 3, 4, and 5, I believe. There's a mix. So and I guess another question, John, on that in terms of the zones, some parcels, whether it's a single family parcel, a commercial parcel, or a multifamily parcel, actually has the safety zone penetrate through it. So you could have a parcel that has that falls on safety zone 2 and safety zone 3. And so I would ask, can you speak to that right now in terms of how county staff would interpret that? Would they, for instance, if the majority of the parcels in safety zone 3 versus safety zone 2, would the entirety of that parcel be really considered to be safety zone 3 or otherwise?
No, we wouldn't extend it beyond where the line is, and we would try to balance the use of the parcel and the design of the parcel to be as consistent as possible with the intent of the ALUC.
John, I believe
Bob.
that there's a specific policy in the ALUCP that addresses properties that have multiple zones. So let me try to find the exact language so we're accurate with that.
Okay, thank you.
And you can go on to the next question while I'm researching that.
Okay. You got another question, Justin? Otherwise, I'm going to hop to the next person.
Yeah, John, please open it up here to the public so they can get their specific questions answered. Thank you.
Okay. So I apologize in advance if I do not get your name right, but Cindy Rajan, is that close?
Yes, sir. Thank you. That's correct. And thank you for putting this program so we all can learn a little bit more about what's going on. And then Justin brought a great point about there are many multifamily R2, R3, and residential multifamily zones. Homes or the lots fall under the safety zone 2, 3, 4, and 5. Sorry, 4 is mostly in the ocean, so it's not have much of an impact, but 2, 3, and 5. And the problem we have is I have submitted a plan to the county, and I was told, even though my lot is right next to a 4-unit apartment building, I cannot put anything in there because of the ALUCP restrictions on the density that defines for zone 2 as 1 house in 10 acres. And then I could use an exemption as right to build as a property owner to put 1 house and 1 ADU in that lot. So I'm allowed to put 2 small homes, but I still have to keep that 50% open area and 20-foot setback to the road, 30-foot setback to the golf course. And then the maximum I could put is 2. So I argued, how about my next lot is a 3-story, 4-unit apartment building? How come I can only put 2 because of ALUCP? And I was explained I could apply for an exemption or a variance, which is costly, time consuming, and only consultants we have to go through because there is a 3-step process explained to me. The first one is going through the county, going through the hearing, and finally it comes to your officer, Director Ford. And then if you say yes, and it goes to RID board has to vote on it and say yes or no. And if it's a yes, then I could go apply for a permit. That's time consuming, cumbersome, and expensive. And the most of the buildable lots in Shelter Cove fall in these zones, like safe zone 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, there are other buildable lots too, but they don't have sewer connection, and they're sitting at a slope like this. And you need to spend at least $200,000 on a foundation to put a house on top of that. So it's probably economically not viable. My plan was to put like 4-unit, 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom houses or an apartment in my residential multifamily. And that is, I'm going to be limited to 2 because of ALUCP. So there is impact on because of ALUCP in the zoning and also on housing. Thank you.
No, I appreciate what you're going through with that. I would be interested in having another opportunity to talk to you about that and having another look at that. We don't want to artificially restrict, but there are, again, there's the 2 different sets of requirements, and I think Bob Bronco and Cody Rogatz went through those pretty well in terms of if we can demonstrate the height is not an issue, especially if the FAA gets involved and says that, then the height can be cleared with a fairly simple variance. I don't think everybody has to have a consultant to do that. In terms of the design, in terms of the infill, was that discussed with staff when you talked to them about this at all?
No, sir, I was not aware of infill, and now I know. Justin also explained it to me, so I know better. But I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just trying to build something with all possible play by the rules, all the strict everything what we have. But then we run into the roadblock of ALUCP's additional restrictions in terms of density, in terms of open space, in terms of floor plan, and the size of the building itself. It's kind of like restricting future developments, even for affordable housing or any type of housing. So like Justin was pointing it out, I would also request if you could do at least safe zone 2, 3, 4, 5, get rid of that, or at least consider pausing implementation for a few more months until further study is conducted, because the community is going to be devastated. There are 125 lots directly impacted. They won't be able to sell it. They won't be able to build anything. Commercial is even worse. At least residential people everyone can get behind building. Commercial is worse. They cannot even get anything done. And to answer your point about the consultants, sir, we don't have the ability. I called at least 40 times the county planning department to get an answer back. And I'm not blaming anybody. I don't want to blame anybody. I'll take my responsibility. That is because the county planning department is pummeled with like thousands and thousands of cannabis permit requests. I went through my hearing before, 14 hearing in one sitting, 13 of them were cannabis. Mine was only for building permit. So I know what challenges you have, but adding one more layer of restriction that too limits the ability to build people affordable housing is very bad for the community, I think. And we coexisted peacefully with the airport and the community generations, decades. We had no problem. Probably a fence would be a better safety, that if we have to save the community from falling airplanes, a fence would be better, because there are deers, there are foxes and other issues. But like throwing like more restrictions on the houses in such a unique place, we are a small, tiny 4,000 acre ranch with a 3,000 foot airstrip in the middle. So anything you could do to that matter to remove those safe zone restrictions would be highly, highly grateful. We'll be so grateful as a community for you.
I appreciate your thoughtful reasonableness, and we do want to work with you as a community. So I apologize too that if you've had trouble getting a hold of us, that's not acceptable. Yes, we do have a lot of cannabis applications, but that's not a reason to not be responsive. So I would love to talk to you about it.
Thank you, sir.
That I see Supervisor Bushnell has her hand up. Yeah, Bob.
I'm ready to share the screen for that prior question about properties with 2 safety zones.
Please do.
There. All right, so in the 2021 ALUCP, SP-11 is the section that describes the procedures that are to be done when a property falls within 2 or more safety zones. So that procedure is already outlaid with what it is.
Okay, so I guess that answers that question pretty clearly. Thanks, Bob, for addressing that for us. I stand completely corrected. And so somebody's asking how they raise their hand. So there's 2 ways to do it. Probably the easiest, if you take your cursor and go down and hover over reactions, you'll see the space bar there that says raise hand. If you hit that, your hand will raise and I'll be able to see it.
John, if I could interrupt, this person is on Teams and I'm not sure it's the same layout.
Okay.
And so I can't, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce the name. I
They
apologize.
they connected on Teams?
Yeah, I'm on Teams. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, they've got it. They got it.
Michelle, I think that they were identifying that they normally utilize Teams, so they're new to Zoom.
Oh, I see. I was wondering, oh, she got her hand raised now. I was wondering, or person, I'm sorry. I was wondering how they were doing Teams.
So I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce your name, but Adita, would you help me hear your name at least once? And then please go ahead.
You're muted, sir.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Yeah, yes, it's Aditya Mukherjee. So yes, so we've owned a home in Shelter Cove for the last 10 years, and it's been just great. And I don't normally participate in these discussions, but I think this has been really interesting. The question that I have is, I've been kind of looking at other plots on Lower Pacific, and obviously this whole discussion about the airport land use has been interesting. My key question is, has the height restrictions changed from the 91 or 93 situation? So I'm trying to understand that. I mean, has there been a change? Because when I talked earlier to the Humboldt Planning Commission, they sent me a form, and that form has a link to a calculator where we can put in our GPS coordinates and the elevation, and it kind of tells us what the height of a proposed building can be. When I did put in that, it came up with a number that doesn't seem quite accurate. So I'm kind of trying to understand if something has changed or the FAA restrictions or FAA requirements have kind of remained the same. If it has, then I suppose it's a different issue, right? But that's what I'm trying to understand. Has there been a change?
I can answer this question.
Thank you.
So the criteria that the FAA uses under their Form 7460 has remained the same for many years. The one thing that has changed is the county's code regarding height restrictions, and that was County Code 333. That was vintage 1950s, and that was replaced with one in vintage 2020. And it just occurred to me that because of the way the county code is kept on the internet, we've kind of lost, if you will, the old code. And what I'm going to work on doing, hopefully in the next week or so, is be able to get the old 1950s code that's been superseded posted on the internet, so that those that want to look at what the height restrictions were codified in vintage 1950 were compared to what the height restrictions are in 2020, that'll be an exercise that someone could go ahead and do if they wanted.
So the question that I have is, when you say the county height restrictions, the only thing that I see is a FAA calculator where you kind of plug in your numbers and it comes up with something. How does the county restrictions conform or not with what the FAA is saying? And perhaps it's something that I can take offline, but I'm just kind of curious.
County code was made to match FAR 77, so it's matching everything that goes along with the Form 7460-1. We made our code consistent with FAA. That's essentially what we did. So there should be no discrepancy between our county code and FAA regulations. So we're not overly restrictive beyond what the FAA requires. So it's minimum adherence to FAA requirements.
Okay, so you're saying there was a change in 2020?
Correct.
Okay.
And I'll get the old code posted on the website. That way, those that are interested in kind of looking back in time to find out what those height restrictions are, they can go ahead and find it and see it there.
Okay, all right. I think that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bob, I want to go back to a question I tried to ask you earlier, and you didn't quite remember that eloquent way you described how the plan was developed. But it seemed to me that you talked about in developing this plan, this isn't a plan that seeks to go way beyond what Caltrans would require, but really seeks to implement minimum standards, just like you just mentioned with the FAA. There are minimum standards that the county is implementing. We're not going way beyond that. Is that the same thing with this ALUCP? And are there areas where we're like beyond what the normal minimums are? And if you could answer that, where I'm going with this next is that, well, just please go ahead and answer that question.
All right. The process of how the ALUCP came to be for this update is the county did apply for and receive a grant from Caltrans Aeronautics to go ahead and update our 93 plan. And we were successful in getting this grant because not only did it cover all the county airports, but it also included the city of Eureka's Samoa Field, and it also included Resort Improvement District. By having it as a comprehensive ALUCP for all these airports, it was very competitive, and the county was awarded the grant. The Caltrans did prepare a handbook for ALUCPs as guidance of what an ALUCP should have. And as the consultant that was selected by the county to update the ALUCP, they adhered to the guidance, to the minimal adherence to what's required in the aeronautics handbook that Caltrans produces. And along the way, the county did hold several public hearings in regards to the project to hear about particular concerns in certain areas. And as a result of that, some tweaking to the plan was done to accommodate concerns that were raised along the way during the public comment processes with that plan. Ultimately, all that was all bundled up together and then eventually presented to the Board of Supervisors for adoption in earlier this year. I forget the exact date. Well, that's kind of the process that went through, and the plan is minimal adherence to compliance with the Caltrans Aeronautic Handbook.
So would there be repercussions or adverse consequences if we didn't comply with the Caltrans handbook?
That's an interesting question. There would be, I know that during the review process, Caltrans was very concerned about some of the policies and some of the things were written in the ALUCP and commented heavily on that. And it did require the consultant to go ahead and justify why things were done a certain way or why they weren't done. So as you start to deviate away from the plans, there are eyes that are looking at it. And the FAA is counting on Caltrans, being the distributor of these grant funds, to keep a watchful eye to make sure that the plans are consistent with what that handbook is.
Okay, so there have been a lot of comments that have been made about the RID, and I tried to address this a little earlier about the RID withdrawing from the ALUCP, but obviously that can't be done. But what if the county, or what if the RID were to request that the county modify the ALUCP to be less restrictive in some of the safety zones? What kind of repercussions if the Board of Supervisors were to choose to say, yep, we're going to do that for the people in Shelter Cove, and we're going to approve those? Would there be negative consequences to going down that path? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
This is something that Cody could probably elaborate more on, because this gets back to your grant assurances for protecting the airports. If you start deviating away from customary practices for what should be done around airports, it could then jeopardize RID's ability to procure federal funds for improving the airport at some point in the future. Cody, do you want to kind of chime in on what that means?
Yeah, thanks, Bob, and thanks, John. So just elaborating a little further on the grant assurances, every time that an airport takes federal money to conduct a project, for example, at Shelter Cove Airport, if Justin, through board approval, was to apply for and accept a grant from the FAA to mill and overlay the runway surface, those monies from the FAA come with a long list of stipulations from the FAA. And these land use compatibility plans and planning how space is utilized around the airport is one of those stipulations. I would just, if the Resort Improvement District was interested in not participating or modifying the ALUCP specific to the Shelter Cove Airport, I would highly recommend that Justin work very closely with Caltrans and the FAA to ensure that they're not putting future funding opportunities at risk, but also, as we've experienced with our county airports over the last few years, the FAA can identify and potentially ask for funding back that they've previously given to the Resort Improvement District for past projects. Not that they've asked for funding back, but they've taken the first step in doing that through a compliance project that we've been working on for the last 2.5 years. So I would just highly recommend to begin those conversations before taking any actions with Caltrans, Aeronautics, and with the FAA. And Justin, if you need any assistance or have any questions with that, certainly feel free to reach out at any time.
Thanks, Cody and Bob. So just a kind of a follow-up question on that. Like, I think there's an airport up in Hoopa that's not addressed by the ALUCP. Was there a reason for not having that included?
When the update was proposed, Public Works did reach out to Hoopa Tribe to see if they wanted to be included in the project. There was some initial interest in it. And then as the project progressed, the tribe no longer followed through with that interest. So it was specifically excluded from the project at that point. Because it is federal land, or federal trust land, I believe, it's also governed by other federal rules regarding that particular airport. Because it wasn't included in the update, the 93 plan still applies to that particular airport at this time as well.
So thank you for that. So just one more question for you guys, put you on the spot deeply here, is that, so it sounds like the RID could go as far as to petition the county to remove the Shelter Cove Airport from the ALUCP. But that could have financial consequences.
That would be something that we'd need to check with county council on, but it would seem that that would be some way where the board could go ahead and rescind the ALUCP for that airport or something to that effect. That might be the most extreme measure that Resort Improvement District may want to take. What might be perhaps a better approach is if the community were to come together and kind of determine what their vision for the greater Shelter Cove area around the airport is, and look at proposing variances, if you will, to the code or to the ALUCP, and then working with Caltrans, Aeronautics, and the FAA to discuss what the implications of this sort of a plan around the airport would be, and to seek getting that sort of plan then blessed through the ALUC. And perhaps the Board of Supervisors could be a good way to do it in a way that won't jeopardize any airport funding based upon grant assurances that RID would need to make to receive the funding for the airport. That may be the way, if there truly is a desire from the community to try to do something that's just not quite fitting in the box. And if they don't necessarily want to do it on a project by project basis. I kind of call it akin to a specific plan of sorts, that you're creating a specific plan for the area.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Supervisor Bushnell, you have your hand up.
Thank you. So Bob, is there a time frame from the time it was passed at the Board of Supervisors? And if the RID and the community is interested in, it would be amendments to that plan for the RID airport. Is there a time frame that this would have to come forward?
I believe it can be done at any particular time. There's been changes and amendments to projects along the way. A perfect example, and this was done under the 93 plan, is up by the Arcata Airport. Steve Mosier is the subdivider and developer of the airport business park. And that particular project falls within the approach of the cross runway, the minor runway that primarily the Coast Guard and other general aviation airplanes seem to use. And there were approvals made by the ALUC regarding that project to adjust zone boundary lines, and tweak things a little bit to go ahead and allow that project to be developed out in a logical and meaningful way. So that's a good case study that we have done that in the past, and there's no reason that we're not going to do that again in the future when projects come forward. So I would point concern.
Go ahead.
I would just point concerned community members to look at the actions that the ALUC took for that particular project up at ACV.
So that is case by case project, but if the RID is interested in changing it, the scope entirely, then that could be something also. There could be two, right? I mean, individually they can challenge individual projects on individual APNs, or the RID could possibly put some amendments that might cover a focus.
Yes.
Okay.
And, I mean, obviously, if you keep doing things piece by piece, it's a time burner.
Yes.
If you go ahead and collectively put everything together in one package, and then you process it through, it's one and done. And then once it's adopted, we're done with it. We don't need to revisit it. I mean, even if we do create the specific plan, I guess, as we don't know what the future is. Our crystal ball is only as good as what we can see. And in the future, our successors may want to do something different, and they may
Well,
need to go ahead and amend it as well in the future as well.
based on that statement, Bob, I'm wondering if the airport goes away, because it could, would the restrictions go away with it?
Yes, I mean, I imagine there would need to be some sort of formal acknowledgement by the ALUC to eliminate the airport as the airport went away, to officially make that statement so that it makes it clear for anyone wanting to develop near the airport that those restrictions don't apply. Even if it does naturally go away just by an obvious of the statement, it would be my preference to try to have some document approved by the ALUC stating that, so that it's cut and clear. There's no questions that it no longer applies at that time.
Okay, thank you. I see there's other hands raised.
Going to go to Lost Coast Wellness.
How's it going, John? This is Jared Boudreau.
Good.
I was going down the road with Michelle on not, just canceling the airport. Why can we do an emergency use for it? Just to keep it open for an emergency, because that's what everybody screams about when you want to shut it down. Because I live on the airport. I watch anywhere from 7 to 20 planes a month come in here. And I don't want 20 planes a month coming in here to affect the housing. So if we abandoned the airport and left it open for emergency use only, that would allow, and it would satisfy emergency use. It would kibosh this restrictions on our ability to build on the house. Is that an option to make it an emergency use airport?
I'm going to defer to Cody, and he's got his hand up, so please do.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I didn't catch the name there. I apologize. But really, the future of the Shelter Cove Airport is up to the Resort Improvement District. And I don't mean to keep pointing to Justin, but I know Justin a little bit and know that he's the general manager down there. And the Resort Improvement District could choose to close the airport. However, as I said earlier on complying with the FAA regulations, I wouldn't advise doing that just on your own as the Resort Improvement District. I would reach out and begin the conversation early on if that's something you want to explore with Caltrans Aeronautics and with the FAA. There is processes that they can walk you through to close an airport. They aren't in general in favor of that, but at the end of the day, it's the Resort Improvement District's airport, and you guys own and manage and operate that airport. So you are the final decision makers, and they are there to assist you with whatever decisions you're choosing to make for short-term and long-term options for that facility. So I would just encourage Justin again to reach out to those two entities to begin that conversation if that's something you even want to explore, to avoid any financial ramifications on just doing it without approval ahead of time.
I can totally appreciate that. Of course, we would go down all the proper channels in doing that, but don't you think it makes sense, why would we restrict the building around the airport? Have you ever been to Shelter Cove, and do you know the airport? So I can kind of understand the context. So who I'm talking to, because this airport is unique. It's not Eureka Airport. It's not any other airport I've been around. It's so small. Nobody flies in here. It just seems awfully cumbersome to restrict the building around. We would prefer it stay the same. This new thing being thrust onto us is something that we're having to deal with. I would think that the majority of the population here would like it to be just as it's been, because that's all I hear. Nobody wants anything to ever change. So we're being forced to have to make a change here. So we're being forced to have these conversations that may impact our grant funding for future projects. We're being forced, and I don't, I understand building code. I'm a general contractor. I'm licensed in California. I understand building codes need to get upgraded every so often to create better safety standards for us. This is not that. I don't know. I just hope that y'all really understand the area before, making any solid decisions. And we'll meet with Justin. If we can reverse this, I think that's the way to go, and keep it just as it was under the 91 restrictions. If we can't do that, then, I think we abandon the airport. And I'm sure we can get enough people to say that we can keep it under an emergency use, because it's the 20 people that fly in here a month that are causing our homes to lose value. So that's just silly. It's just silly. With that, I'll stop talking.
Thanks, Fred. I do want to make something really, really clear. There seems to be some misunderstanding that this plan hasn't been adopted yet, or it's just being proposed. This plan was prepared, and there were public meetings over a period of about 2 years. And then it was adopted on April 13th of 2021. So while it seems new right now, it has been in effect for, by my estimation, just under 6 months. So I know that's new, and I'm not trying to be argumentative with that. I just want everybody to be aware of what the circumstances actually are. So when we talk about making changes to it, what we're really talking about is not changing a draft plan, but is applying to the county to modify an existing plan. And so that would be the process. And it's something that's doable. We're talking about it because it's a feasible path. So we're trying to help you all just be educated in the circumstances and process. So thanks. I see Jim Wright. Your hand is up.
John, before we go to the next person, I do want to reiterate one of the important themes that we talked about earlier that you highlighted, and perhaps we should highlight a second time, which is that right to build policy within the ALUCP. Because the last speaker was concerned about the value of their home going down because the ALUCP would unduly restrict or create some loss of value to their property. So you have an existing single family home under the right to build. If it were to be destroyed in some manner, under right to build, you get to put it back. If for some chance it had a penetration into the County Code 333 airspace, then you would first look at doing your 7460 to see if the FAA has concern or not. If they don't, your permit is processed. There's no holdup. If FAA does have a concern on it, then the variance process would then go to the FAA, or not to the FAA, to the Board of Supervisors for consideration. So there is that pathway to go ahead and make it happen. The building height restrictions still apply, even if this plan is removed. So if for some reason this airport plan was removed, your property was destroyed in some manner and you decided to rebuild it, because the height restrictions per County Code 333 are in place, you're still subject to the administrative and/or board variance process if it did happen to penetrate that airspace. But most importantly, you have an existing land use for your single family home under right to build, you put it back. That's simple.
Thanks, Bob.
And you said under FAA, where would we have to go back to the FAA for which Which part of that? I missed that part.
That's under County Code 333. You would then, it talks about it, you'd apply to the FAA for under Form 7460.
That's relative to
And is
height.
that new? Is that a new policy?
Nope, any construction near an airport's required to comply with 7460 per federal law. That's been in existence for a long time.
Ever. Okay.
So Bob, along with what you're saying, someone just said height restrictions are a function of the FAA and airport. Is that, can you address that?
Yes, our county code was changed to mimic the FAA regulations so that we're consistent with that for minimal compliance. And the FAA has had those rules in place for a substantial period of time. I don't have the exact date off the top of my head. It definitely predates our 2021 ALUCP. Most likely predates our 93 plan as well. And that's just something that's in place to protect airports from tall buildings being built right next to it that could be a hindrance to flight.
Thank you.
Mr. Wright, thank you for being so patient. You're not muted, but I'm not hearing you.
He's muted, John.
Now you're muted again. There you go. So where your, Mr. Wright, where your mute button is, go down and hit the little arrow there. And it'll bring a pop-up and go up to your microphone.
Jim, are you able to type in your question in the chat room? Do you see the chat room? Down on the bottom? So I think you need to turn your volume up. It could be down on the bottom.
Yeah, if you go to your mute button where the arrow is, I'm sorry, go to the audio settings, click on that. And that will bring up a display panel. One of those will be your microphone, and move the blue bar all the way to the right.
Unmute yourself so we can hear you if you do get it going.
Go ahead and unmute. You got to unmute yourself there, Jim. Lower left-hand side of the screen.
John, let's go on to, I think, Bill, and we'll come back to Jim. Jim, start talking if you figure it out so we can come back to you.
Okay, Bill Zolan, you are up next. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I appreciate you guys taking time to do this on you guys from the county. I think my angst, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, the reason you're hearing a lot of people that are a bit disgruntled, I think that us as the property owners here at Shelter Cove have been misrepresented. And I think it's, I don't know, you know, really, there's been no public meeting, right, for us that we were privy to. You guys did a pretty good job. I've read the report of having your public meetings but here at the Shelter Cove, it was nothing. And I think you're hearing that from some of the others. And as well, we contributed, 20% of the community's the cost share for our little airport that has 1,100 flights a year. Who made that decision to contribute 20% of the, sure, it's a small amount, $5,200, but still, there was some decisions made, and on us as property owners, and that's why we're here today.
I appreciate that, and I do see all the comments in the chat that people do not feel like they received notice, and I'm sure there was a process to that maybe either Bob or
I can speak a little bit to it. First, let's address an easy one.
Yep.
The county applied for and did receive a $250,000 grant. So Shelter Cove's contribution toward it was substantially less than 20%. Secondly, during the process, I'd have to go ahead and find the exact notes of when we had the different public meetings. Because of the nature of the airports being broad and covering a very specific area, the noticing was through other means such as publication in newspapers as allowed by state law, and as well as our county public information officer pushing out news flashes and things to that regarding the airport. So it wasn't like a normal planning project where the planning and building department sends a specific notice to everyone within 300 feet of a project saying, oh, by the way, on October 30th, the Planning Commission is going to meet to consider a coastal development permit for a 2-story, 3,000 square foot house with a 2-car garage and 500 square foot deck on Lower Pacific. You're not getting any kind of noticing like that. This is much more broad in terms of the noticing that was done for the public input, and all that noticing and public input was done in accordance with what was required by law.
Yeah, John, thank you. If I could continue, thank you for that. I guess my issue is with either our supervisor or our RID board that, maybe dropped the ball on us. I know they do a really good job. I'm not, but this, I think there was a little, the ball was dropped.
So I'm going to address the supervisor position. I had absolutely not one thing to do with the noticing, as I was not the elected supervisor at the time. I apologize that you guys didn't get the public notice or a public meeting like this. I did ask for this meeting to address the concerns for the community, but I do want to be very specific. When this came to me in April, it was already done and put together and had already been noticed and worked through for the previous 2 years. And as far as the RID board, I can't speak to that. I don't think anyone intentionally did anything, and we are hearing your concerns right now, and that's what we're trying to do, to figure out a process forward for the landowners through the RID, through the Board of Supervisors, to hear your concerns. And I do apologize. That's why this meeting is happening, so we can figure out if we can do an amendment, what we need to do. Jim, can we hear you? No, I'm sorry, Jim, we still can't hear you. If you can figure out how to type on the chat. Oh, okay, so type your questions on that chat, Jim, because I just seen you do that. I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
While he's typing that out, I'm going to go to John Culpa. We're at 6:52, and I want to be mindful of time here tonight. So, Mr. Culpa.
Can you hear me?
Oh.
Yes.
Hello, everybody out there in computer land. Anyway,
Jim.
I'm a long-term resident. I've owned property in Shelter Cove since 1965. My parents built their house here and it was started in 1977, 78, and it was completed in 79. My parents, to get the permit to build this house, it took them over 5 years. And that was back in the 70s. The thing that actually broke the pattern was my mother wrote to the governor of California, who was Ronald Reagan at the time. He got on the phone and 30 days later, my parents got a permit. Now, when it comes to permits for building houses in Shelter Cove or Humboldt County, the county is not responsive and they're not friendly toward the people building. People that want to build have a lot on their plate between the construction of the building, the plans and everything else. To make people jump through 5 boards or 5 groups of people to approve a building permit is unreasonable. I repeat, it's unreasonable and it's a burden to people trying to build. Now, to address the airport is a symbol of progress. If people live in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Colorado, Seattle, and they want to come to Shelter Cove, the fastest way here is fly. That's the reason why the airport was built here originally. This was supposed to be a fly-in resort, but because of insurance companies bankrupting Piper aircraft, Cessna aircraft, Beechcraft aircraft, general aviation has really been stymied, and it's really been hard for people to live that lifestyle. Now, another thing I want to address is the airport. It's the only big piece of property that's really level in Shelter Cove. Sooner or later, there's going to be a major fire here. And that road, and the road between Shelter Cove and Highway 101 will be closed. When it's closed, how in the heck do you think people are going to get in and out of here for medical, medevac, to get essential supplies such as insulin, other things? The airport needs to be here. Now, another thing is the airport is one of the few places that a pilot can make an emergency landing in this area. It's not flat around this part of the country, so it's one of the few places that people can use for emergency landing, like the Army helicopters did about 5 or 6 years ago, and they stayed here, I think, 3 days. And now to address the point about safety, no one has ever died in an airplane on Shelter Cove Airport. They've died in the ocean. That's right, Michelle. They were in the ocean when they died, not at the airport. And it was because of pilot, it was a pilot's fault. Okay. And another thing too is when we have that major fire here, all the people that live in the zoo area, Toth and up above and everywhere, Shelter Cove Airport is the evacuation area. When they come down here with their cars, when they come down here with their trailers and everything, this is one of the few places where people can basically seek safety from fire. And another thing is, if you look at the county, look what they did with the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall in Garberville. It's been 6 years. I know it's not you, Michelle, but the county should have addressed it years ago, and it's the county's fault. And now it looks like it's going to be 9, 10, or 11 years before we get the hall. So the point is that when it comes to giving supervisors a pay increase, they only have to have a 15-minute discussion. When it comes to like property owners, they have to jump through hoops for a year or 2 before they can get their building permit. So that's my say. Love you guys. Bye.
Thank you. So Jim, do you have the ability to, there it is. So it says we are new homeowners in Shelter Cove and on Lower Main and back up to the airport. I'm a pilot with plan and purchase this property because of the airport. This airport augments the entire community. Let's get a general plan together for Shelter Cove so we can meet everyone's needs. Yeah, no, I think, thank you, Jim. That is absolute voice of reason. So I think one of the things we've talked about tonight is talking through what is it that the community really wants. And I would ask, maybe it takes a little bit more individual attention to walk through some of these things and find out what the real limitations are. I fear that maybe some people have looked at what the limitations are, but there's a lot of speculation that properties being overly limited beyond what was limited in 1993. I'm not entirely convinced that that's all true. I think a lot of the restrictions come from the height restrictions, which is not the ALUCP. But if there are things that we can do to make the ALUCP more workable for Shelter Cove, we'd be happy to work with you to see what we can do to make that happen. As Cody mentioned, we don't want to do anything that would jeopardize any funding, potential, past, present, or future. And so we want to be careful there, but it really is a community decision in terms of what you want to see. And so we'd be happy to work with you to do that. We're pushing right up at 7 right now. Supervisor Bushnell, anything you'd like to say? You get the last word.
Well, first of all, I wanted to ask you, with your comment that you just made, we would go through the RID, correct? That would be an involvement with them and the county and to come to the supervisors. And I really want to thank the community for coming forward and expressing your guys' concern. I apologize for you feeling left out previously, but I am gonna have a call Justin tomorrow and have a conversation with him and see what we can do. And I really, really thank everybody for expressing their concerns and how respectful and polite everybody was.
Absolutely. Thank you, Supervisor. And thank you, everybody. It has been a vibrant discussion, and we will anticipate and look forward to working with Justin to see what future steps can be taken.
Thank you, everybody. Good night. And thank you to the county staff for answering all the questions and being on the real hot seat.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.